Let me ask you something before I start. Have you ever seen someone everyone laughed at, and then watched that same crowd go dead silent in the space of about 4 seconds? Not quiet, not polite, dead silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the air recyclers humming in the walls because there's nothing else left to hear. I was there. I was 19 rotations old, sitting in the third row from the back, and I will remember it until the day they pour me into the ground. So sit down. Get comfortable. This is going to take a while because if I rush it, you won't believe me, and I need you to believe me. This is the story of a human girl who wore armor to school. And it's the story of what we saw when the armor finally came off. My name is Oren. I'm Corvani. That means feathers, hollow bones, a face you'd probably call bird-like if you were being polite and creepy if you weren't. We're not a warrior people. We never have been. My grandmother used to say the Corvani survived 300,000 rotations of galactic history by being too boring to conquer and too useful to kill. We build things. We file things. We keep the lights on while braver species go off and die in glorious wars. So understand, when I tell you about courage, I'm not telling you as someone who has any. I'm telling you as someone who watched it happen from very close up and never forgot the smell of it. The school was called Meridian Crossing Preparatory. Big name for what it actually was, which was a converted orbital transit station out past the 7th ring of the Thel system. Cheap rent, bad food, a view of a dead moon out every window. The kind of school your family sends you to when they want you off-world and educated but can't quite afford the places with real gardens and real teachers. We were a mixed lot. That was the whole point of Meridian. After the Concord Accords, the Federation got very excited about integration, which is a fancy word that means cramming 100 different species into the same hallway and hopping nobody starts a war over lunch. We had Threll students with their long copper limbs. We had the Vosk, who smelled like wet metal and never blinked. We had a few of us Corvani, mostly the children of clerks and administrators. We had the Lumites, who glowed faintly when they were nervous, which made cheating on tests basically impossible for them. And then in my 3rd year, we got a human. I want you to understand how rare that was. Humans had only joined the Federation 11 rotations before. 11, that's nothing. That's an eye blink in galactic terms. Most of us had never seen one in person. We'd seen the broadcasts, of course. Everyone had. The footage from the Frontier Wars. The footage they weren't supposed to show children but showed us anyway, because somebody decided we needed to understand our new allies. I'll tell you about those broadcasts later. They matter. For now, just know this. When the announcement came over the station feed that a human student would be joining our year group, the whole school lost its mind. Not in a good way. In the way a crowd loses its mind when something dangerous and exciting and a little bit forbidden walks into the room. A human, they kept saying, an actual human. There were rumors before she even arrived. There are always rumors. Someone said humans could lift their own body weight over their heads, which turned out to be true, by the way, and undersold. Someone said they didn't feel pain the way we did. Someone said they'd been engineered for war by an ancient empire and then abandoned. Someone said they ate meat, real meat, off the bone. That last one was true too, and it made half the cafeteria refuse to sit near her for the first month. Her name was Kestra Vale. I learned that name the way everyone did from the class roster that scrolled across our slates the morning she arrived. Kestra Vale, homeworld, Earth Sol system, previous education, a string of redacted entries, just black bars where the history should have been. I remember staring at those black bars. We all did. You didn't get redacted entries on a student file unless something had happened that the Federation didn't want written down. But we were children. We didn't think something terrible happened to this person. We thought, ooh, mysterious. We thought it was exciting. We were idiots, I'll own that. The morning she arrived, it was snowing. I should explain. The station didn't have weather, obviously. It was a hunk of metal in the dark. But the climate system had a malfunction that cycle, and the moisture in the upper concourse froze and drifted down through the atrium in slow, fat flakes. The maintenance crew was scrambling. The administrators were furious. And the rest of us stood in the atrium with our faces turned up, catching fake snow on our tongues and beaks, and whatever else we had, because we were young and the world was still mostly a place that delighted us. That's when the airlock cycled. I was close, closer than most. I'd skipped my first class to watch the snow, which means I have my own laziness to thank for being a witness to all of it. The doors opened, the mist rolled out, and she walked through it. Now, I've replayed this moment in my head about 10,000 times, and I want to be careful because memory lies. Memory makes things bigger than they were. But I swear to you, on my grandmother's grave, the first thing that hit me was the sound. She was wearing armor. Not a uniform, not a fashion piece, not the soft, pretty ceremonial stuff some of the wealthy Threll kids wore to look important. Actual armor, plated, scuffed. Gunmetal gray gone dull with age and scarred all over with marks I didn't have names for yet. It covered her from her boots to her collar. Heavy plating across the chest. Segmented guards down the arms. And it made a sound when she moved. A low, mechanical SHNK, servos and joints, and the soft hydraulic hiss of something built to keep a body alive in conditions that would kill the rest of us. She walked into the atrium, into the fake snow, in full battle plate, and she stopped. And she looked around at all of us staring at her, and she didn't say a word. Her face was the only thing showing, pale, sharp, a scar through one eyebrow thin and white, dark hair shaved close on one side, eyes the color of cold water. She was maybe 17, our age, a child like us. And she was dressed for a war that none of us could see. Somebody laughed. I don't know who. I've thought about it a lot and I genuinely don't know, and maybe that's a mercy because I'd hate to carry that name around. But somebody in the back of the crowd let out a high, nervous bark of a laugh, and the moment they did, the spell broke and everyone started talking at once. Is she serious? What is she wearing? Did nobody tell her it's a school? Maybe humans just dress like that. My cousin said they're all soldiers. Maybe it's like a costume. She heard all of it. I know she did because her jaw tightened just slightly just at the corner, and her eyes did a thing I'd come to know very well over the following months. They went flat. Not angry, not hurt, flat, like a door closing, like someone deciding very quietly that the people in front of her were not worth the energy it would take to react. Then a teacher came hurrying through the crowd, instructor male, a Threll, all copper limbs and flustered apologies, and ushered her away toward the registration office, and the show was over. But the talking didn't stop. It didn't stop for weeks. Here is the thing about cruelty. People think it arrives like a storm, sudden, loud, obvious. It doesn't. It arrives like erosion, a little at a time, a joke here, a look there, a nickname that catches on. By the time you notice the canyon, the water's been working at it for a long, long while. They called her the Can. As in tin can, as in armor, as in a girl so strange she had to wrap herself in metal to face a hallway. It started as a whisper and became a thing everyone said. Here comes the Can. Watch out, the Can's in the lift. Don't sit near the Can, she'll rust. The Vosk kids were the worst about it. They're a status-obsessed species, the Vosk, always sorting everyone into ranks, and they decided very early that Kestra Vale was at the bottom, beneath them, beneath everyone. A primitive in a metal shell from a species that had been crawling out of the mud while the rest of the galaxy was crossing the stars. She never wore anything else. That was the part that fascinated people, the part that kept the cruelty fed. Every single day she came to class in that armor. The plating, the servos, the low mechanical hum. She'd sit at her desk and it groaned under the weight of her every time this little protest of metal, and she'd take out her slate and she'd work. Silent while the room buzzed around her. She ate in the armor. She walked the halls in it. There were rumors she slept in it. And the teachers, I'm ashamed to say this, the teachers let it go. Oh, they made noises. Instructor Male pulled her aside once and suggested, gently, that the uniform requirement was meant to help students feel like part of the community. Kestra looked at her for a long moment and said the first full sentence I ever heard her speak. "This is my uniform." That was it. That was all. And something in the way she said it, quiet, final, with absolutely no room left for argument, made Instructor Male drop the subject and never bring it up again. I think the teachers were a little afraid of her. I think most of them had seen the same broadcasts I had, and somewhere underneath all their talk of integration and community, they remembered what a human could do. I should tell you about me, so you understand why I noticed her when most people only laughed. I was a coward, I told you that already, but there's a specific kind of coward I was, and it matters. I was the kind who got noticed by bullies and decided, very young, that the safest thing to be was invisible. I kept my head down. I did my work. I made myself small and quiet and useful and forgettable, and it mostly worked. The Vosk left me alone because there was no fun in tormenting something that never reacted. So I knew that flat look, the door-closing look. I'd worn it myself 100 times. When I saw it on Kestra Vale's face in the atrium, I recognized it the way you recognize your own reflection in a dark window. Oh, I thought, she's doing what I do. She's making herself a wall. The only difference was that I'd built my wall out of silence and shrinking. She'd built hers out of armor. It went on like that for most of a term. Kestra in her plating, the school in its cruelty, me in my corner watching both. And then one day in the late cycle, something small happened, and it changed everything for me, even though it changed nothing for anyone else. It was lunch. The cafeteria was loud the way cafeterias are loud across every species in the galaxy, that universal roar of young people who haven't yet learned what's worth shouting about. I was at my usual table in the corner, eating my paste alone, when I saw the Vosk kids close in on her. There were 4 of them. The ringleader was a big one named Drask, all gray hide and that wet metal smell, with the little rank spines along his shoulders that the Vosk grow taller the more important they think they are. His were very tall. His family was rich. He decided early that humiliating the human was his personal sport, and the rest of the school mostly let him, because that's what schools do. They let the loud, cruel ones set the rules and call it normal. Kestra was sitting alone, as always, eating as always, slow and methodical, like even eating was a task she'd been trained to do efficiently. Drask sat down across from her, his 3 friends spread out around her, boxing her in. I felt my stomach drop because I knew that formation. Everyone who's ever been bullied knows that formation. "Hey, Drask said, loud enough for the tables around to hear. "We've got a question. The whole school's been wondering." She didn't look up. "Is there even a person in there?" He rapped his knuckles on her shoulder plate, tock, 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 like he was knocking on a door. "Or is it just metal all the way down? Is that why you never take it off? Because there's nothing underneath?" His friends laughed. The tables around laughed. Kestra kept eating. "I heard," Drask went on, leaning in, "that your whole species is like this. Cowards, hiding behind machines because your soft little bodies can't take a hit. Is that it, Can? Are you scared? Is the big bad human scared of a school?" And here's where it gets strange. Here's the first crack in everything I thought I understood. Kestra Vale put down her utensil. She turned her head, and she looked at Drask, really looked at him, for the first time, and she smiled. It was the worst smile I have ever seen. I don't mean ugly. I mean terrible. It was the smile of someone who has seen the absolute worst the universe has to offer and finds a rich boy's threats genuinely, deeply funny. Like he was a small animal making small animal noises and didn't know it. "Scared," she repeated, soft, almost kind. "You think I'm scared?" "I know you are. Look at you. You can't even." "Drask." She said his name like she was filing it away somewhere. Do you know what fear actually feels like? He opened his mouth. No, she said before he could. You don't, I can tell. You've never been scared a single day in your life, not real fear, the kind where your body stops being yours, the kind where you can't make your hands work because they're shaking too hard and you have to do the thing anyway because if you don't, people die. She tilted her head. You've never felt that, and I hope you never do. I really do, because I wouldn't wish it on you. The whole table had gone quiet. So no, she said, picking her utensil back up. I'm not scared of you. You're not the kind of thing that scares me. Nothing in this school is. And she went back to eating. Drask sat there for a second, his rank spines twitching, trying to find the move that would put him back on top. He couldn't. There wasn't one. You can't win against someone who genuinely doesn't care what you do to them. He got up, said something about freaks under his breath and stalked off with his friends. And from my corner, I watched Kestra Vale finish her lunch alone, and I thought, that girl is not hiding from anything. That girl has already survived something the rest of us can't even imagine. I just didn't know what yet. I started watching her after that. Not in a creepy way or, all right, maybe a little in a creepy way, but I was a lonely Corvani teenager and she was the most interesting thing that had ever happened to me, so cut me some slack. I noticed things. I noticed she never sat with her back to a door. Ever. In every room, she found the seat with the clearest line of sight to the exits, and if someone was already in it, she'd stand rather than take a worse position. I noticed her eyes never stopped moving. Even when she looked like she was reading, she was tracking the room, cataloging. I'd see her gaze flick to the door every time it opened, snap to anyone who moved too fast and then settle again. It was exhausting just to watch. She did it constantly, automatically, the way you and I breathe. I noticed she flinched at sounds. Not loud sounds exactly, specific ones. A tray dropped on the floor was nothing to her, but once a maintenance drone in the ceiling let out a particular high-pitched whine as it powered up, and Kestra Vale was out of her seat and halfway into a crouch behind her desk before she'd consciously decided to move. She caught herself, straightened up, sat back down. Her face never changed. But her hands were shaking. The kind of shaking where your body stops being yours. And I thought about what she'd said to Drask, and I understood that she hadn't been speaking in metaphor. She'd been telling him exactly what had happened to her. She just knew he was too small to hear it. I tried to talk to her once. It went badly, of course it did. It was in the station library, the quiet annex on the lower concourse, where almost nobody went because the lighting was bad and the chairs were worse. I went there to be alone. So did she, apparently. I came around a shelf and there she was, sitting in the corner with the best sightline in the room, reading something on her slate, the soft hum of her armor the only sound. I should have left. The smart move was to leave. Instead I said, "Hi." She looked up, the flat door closing look. "What?" Real smooth, Oren. I wanted to say I don't think you're a coward." Something moved behind her eyes. Surprise, maybe. People didn't talk to her. They talked about her constantly, but to her, almost never. I was breaking a rule and we both knew it. "Okay," she said. "And I mean the stuff Drask says. About hiding, I don't think that's why you wear it." I gestured vaguely at the armor. "The armor, I don't think you're hiding." Her jaw tightened. There it was, that little muscle. And what do you think then? I should have said something kind. Something gentle. Instead, because I was an idiot and because I'd spent weeks watching her and building a whole theory in my head, I said the truest and stupidest thing I could have said. "I think you're still at war." The silence after that lasted a very long time. She set down her slate. She looked at me, and I felt, for the first time, what it was like to be on the receiving end of her full attention, the thing she gave Drask only a fraction of. And it was like standing in front of an open airlock, like the air was being pulled out of me. "Walk away," she said quietly, "right now, while I still want you to." I walked away. But I'll tell you something. Right before I turned the corner, I looked back, and she wasn't reading anymore. She was sitting very still, staring at nothing, and one of her hands had come up to rest flat against her own chest plate over her heart, or where a heart would be, like she was holding something in, or holding something together. I went home and I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those redacted entries on her file, the black bars, and I started to do something I'd never done before in my safe, small, cowardly life. I started to dig. It took me 3 cycles to find anything, and what I found, I almost wish I hadn't. The Federation buries things. You'd be amazed how much. But they bury things the way the Corvani do everything, bureaucratically, in layers, in forms and cross-references and dead links. And I am, if nothing else, a clerk's grandson. I know how to read a buried thing. I started with her homeworld, Earth Sol system, that was public. But there was a secondary entry on her file, a place of origin separate from homeworld, the way colonial kids list both the world they're from and the world their family is from. Kestra's secondary origin was a place called Howard's Reach. I'd never heard of it, so I looked it up. It took some doing. The main records were sealed, but the Corvani Administrative Network keeps shadow copies of everything for continuity purposes, which is a fancy way of saying we're terrified of losing data, and in one of those shadow copies, in a list of frontier settlements, I found it. Howard's Reach, human colony, established in the early years of human expansion, out past the veil, that disputed stretch of space the Federation and the Cafeteria Dominion had been fighting over for a generation. Population at peak, roughly 40,000. And then, 3 rotations before Kestra Vale walked into my school, a single status update. Howard's Reach lost. That was it, one word, lost, the kind of word a clerk uses when he doesn't want to write the real one. I dug deeper. I found casualty estimates. I found Cafeteria incursion reports. I found a Federation assessment, marked low priority because the colony had been small and remote and not worth the resources to defend, that described what happened at Howard's Reach over the course of a 40-day siege. I'm not going to tell you all of it. Some of it isn't mine to tell, and some of it I still can't say out loud without my voice doing things I don't like, but I'll tell you the shape of it. The Cafeteria came for the colony. The Federation, which was supposed to protect it, decided the Vale colonies were strategically unviable and pulled their fleet back to defensible positions. They left 40,000 humans on a rock at the edge of nowhere with no support, no evacuation, and no hope. And here's the part that I read 4 times before I believed it. The colony held for 40 days. 40 days against a Cafeteria Dominion strike force, with no military, no navy, no reinforcements. 40 days of farmers and engineers and children picking up whatever weapons they could build or scavenge and fighting a species that had been conquering the stars for 10,000 rotations. They shouldn't have lasted 40 hours. They lasted 40 days. And on the 40th day, when the Reach finally fell, the Cafeteria who took it found something that, according to the report, significantly exceeded threat projections for a civilian population. The report didn't say what, but it noted the strike force took casualties that approached operational losses for a contested military objective. The humans had bled them. The farmers and the engineers and the children had made the conquerors of the galaxy pay for every single meter of ground. There was a survivor list at the end of the file. It was very short. Out of 40,000 people, the Federation rescue team that arrived 11 days after the colony fell, 11 days too late, because the Reach wasn't worth arriving on time for, recovered 31 survivors. 31. I read the names. I made myself read all of them. The 7th name on the list was Vale Kestra, age at recovery, 16. I sat with that for a long time. A 16-year-old girl, on a colony of 40,000, through a 40-day siege. One of 31 people pulled out of the wreckage afterward. I thought about the way she sat with her back to the wall, the way her eyes never stopped moving, the way she dropped into a crouch when a drone whined the wrong way, the way she'd looked at Drask and laughed at the idea that anything in our school could scare her. Nothing in our school could scare her. We were children worried about lunch tables and status spines. She had spent 40 days watching her world burn. And she came to us, to a converted transit station full of soft, safe, cruel kids who'd never gone hungry or afraid a day in their lives, and we laughed at her. We called her the Can. We knocked on her armor and asked if there was even a person inside. There was a person inside. There was someone who had survived a thing the rest of us couldn't even imagine, and who got up every single cycle and put on the armor that had kept her alive, because taking it off meant being defenseless in a universe that had already proven it would not protect her. I understood the armor now. It wasn't a costume. It wasn't cowardice. It was the only thing that had ever kept her safe. It was the last piece of a dead world she carried on her back. It was a promise she'd made to herself, somewhere in those 40 days, that she would never, ever be unprotected again. And I'd told her in a library to her face, "I think you're still at war." I was right. That was the worst part. I was right, and I'd had no idea what that actually meant. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found. Who would I tell? And what would they do with it but make it into another story, another rumor, another thing to whisper about the human girl? But I changed how I acted. I started sitting near her. Not at her table, I wasn't brave enough for that, and I think she'd have hated it, but at the next one over. Close enough that she knew I was there. I'd nod to her in the halls. Small things. The kind of small things a coward can manage. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, something shifted between us. She stopped giving me the flat look. One cycle in the library she let me sit at the same table. We didn't talk. She read, I pretended to read, and the soft hum of her armor filled the quiet, and it was, somehow, the most peaceful I'd felt in years. Another cycle, she spoke first. "You're the one who said I'm still at war." I froze. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have." "No," she didn't look up from her slate. "You were right, most people get it wrong. They think I wear this because I'm broken or scared or showing off." A pause. "You're the first one who said the true thing." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing, which is the smartest thing I did that whole rotation. After a while she added very quietly, "It doesn't come off, not because I can't take it off. Because if I do, if I'm standing there with nothing between me and everything, I'm back there. Every time, I'm back on the reach and the sky is on fire and I'm 14 and I'm holding a rifle that's too big for me and there are people screaming and I have to." She stopped. Her hand was on her chest plate again. "It keeps me here, the weight of it. It reminds me where I am, that I got out, that it's over." "What is it?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Over." She finally looked at me. And there was something in her face I hadn't seen before, not the flat wall, not the terrible smile, but something raw and young and tired underneath all of it. "No," she said, "it's never over, you just learn to carry it. I want to tell you about the broadcasts now, the ones I mentioned at the start. When humanity joined the Federation, there was a debate about how to introduce them to the rest of us. The species that had been around longer were nervous. Humans were violent, the thinking went, aggressive, dangerous. The Federation didn't want to panic, so they put together a series of educational broadcasts, propaganda really, meant to make humans seem safe, friendly, just another species at the table. But propaganda has to be built out of something true, and the truth about humans kept leaking through the cracks. There was one broadcast they showed us in our first year. It was supposed to be about human resilience, a nice, warm word. It showed footage of human disaster response, human medics, human rescue teams, smiling faces, helping hands. But buried in the middle, for maybe 4 seconds, there was a clip the editors must have missed or maybe left in on purpose. It was combat footage. A human soldier, alone, badly wounded, holding a defensive position. The kind of wound that would have put any species in the galaxy on the ground, accepting the end. The human didn't go down. The human stood up, reloaded, and kept fighting. And the voiceover, pleasant, soothing, said something I never forgot. Humans possess an unusual relationship with their own survival. Where most species recognize a losing position and act to preserve themselves, human psychology frequently overrides self-preservation in favor of objective completion or the protection of others. Federation analysts continue to study this trait. That's the polite version. The impolite version is the one the Vosk kids whispered, the one that turned out to be the real reason everyone was both fascinated and afraid. Humans don't know when to quit. Other species, when you push them past the point of survival, break, or flee. Humans dig in. Humans get worse. The more hopeless it gets, the harder they fight, and they will trade their own lives for the lives of others without seeming to think it's even a difficult decision. The Cafeteria found that out at Howard's Reach. 40,000 civilians who should have surrendered and didn't, and made the conquest of one worthless rock cost more than the conquest of entire systems. We watched that broadcast in our first year and thought it was just a story, a thing that happened far away to people who weren't real to us. And then one of those people came and sat in our cafeteria, and we knocked on her armor and asked if anybody was home. I'm telling you all of this, the file, the broadcasts, the 40 days, because I need you to understand what we were sitting next to. Every single cycle, while we laughed. We thought she was the strange one, the one who didn't fit, the primitive in the metal shell. We were the children. She was the only adult in the building. She just stopped aging on the inside somewhere around her 14th rotation, on a burning world with a rifle too big for her hands. And the universe, which has a cruel sense of timing, was about to prove it to every single one of us. Because 3 cycles after that conversation in the library, the thing happened. The thing I started this story with. The thing that made an entire crowded room go dead silent in 4 seconds. It started like all the worst things do, as something boring. A scheduled maintenance window, a cargo transfer, a routine systems test on the lower concourse. Nobody was worried. Nobody was watching. Why would we be? We were safe. We were children at a school. Nothing bad ever happened to us. That was the last cycle I ever believed that. Let me pick it up right where I left it. A scheduled maintenance window, a cargo transfer, a routine systems test on the lower concourse. Boring, forgettable, the kind of thing nobody on a school station ever thinks about, because it's somebody else's job in somebody else's part of the station, and it has nothing to do with you. I've learned since then that the worst disasters always wear boring clothes. They don't announce themselves. They sneak in dressed as routine, and by the time you realize what's happening, it's already happening to you. Here's what I pieced together afterward, from the incident reports and the survivor accounts, and the things people whispered for rotations after. The station was old. I told you that. A converted transit hub past the 7th ring, running on cheap rent and bad maintenance, and a climate system that dropped fake snow when it felt like it. The Federation had certified it fit for educational use, which is bureaucrat speak for we didn't look very hard. What nobody had looked at in a very long time, was the containment grid on the lower cargo level. You see, before Meridian Crossing was a school, it was a transit hub, and transit hubs move everything, including things that have to be kept locked down, specimens, hazardous cargo, and during the war years, the same war that burned Howard's Reach, military material passing through to the front. Most of it had been cleared out when they converted the station. Most. In a sealed bay on the lowest level, behind blast doors that hadn't been opened in 11 rotations, there was a thing nobody on staff even knew was still there. A leftover. A piece of the war that everyone wanted to forget, sitting in the dark, slowly degrading, waiting. It was a cafeteria breach hound. I should explain what that is, because if you've never seen one, the words won't mean anything, and I need them to mean something. The cafeteria don't fight with just soldiers. They fight with animals, engineered ones, grown in vats, shaped by 10,000 rotations of making war into an art form. The breach hound is the worst of them, or one of the worst. It's the size of a transport sled. It has no eyes, it doesn't need them. It hunts by heat and motion and the electrical noise that living bodies make. Its skin is armored in overlapping plates that shrug off small arms fire. It has limbs that end in cutting edges, and it is fast, horribly, impossibly fast for something that size, and it was bred for one purpose: to be released into a sealed enemy position and kill everything inside it before anyone could react. They used them at Howard's Reach. Kestra Vale had seen one before. She'd seen what they do. She was one of 31 people who'd survived a place where these things were turned loose on civilians. And there was one on our station. Captured, sealed away, half forgotten, dormant for 11 rotations in a containment field that was slowly, quietly failing. The maintenance window that cycle included a power rerouting on the lower levels. The rerouting cut the containment field. And the breach hound woke up. I didn't know any of that when it started. None of us did. What I knew was this. I was in the main concourse with about 200 other students, between classes, in that loud, crowded chaos of bodies moving in every direction, when the station lights flickered. Then they went red. Then a sound came up through the floor that I have never been able to describe properly, and I've tried. It wasn't an alarm. Alarms are man-made. They have a rhythm, a logic. This was a screech, wet and grinding and alive, and it came from below us, from the lower levels, and it rose up through the deck plating and into our feet and our bones, and some animal part of every single one of us, regardless of species, understood at once that we were prey. The concourse froze. 200 students, a dozen species, and every one of them went still in the exact same instant. That's instinct. That's the part of you older than language. Something is hunting. Don't move. The screech came again, closer. And then the blast doors at the far end of the concourse, the ones that led down to the cargo levels, buckled. Not opened, buckled, bent outward like foil, like something on the other side had hit them at full speed, and through the gap came the breach hound. I want to describe it to you, but my memory of the next few moments is broken into pieces, like a dropped plate. I get fragments. I remember the size of it, bigger than I'd imagined from the file. It filled the corridor. I remember the smell, chemical and rotten, like a wound and a machine at the same time. I remember the way it moved, that horrible wrongness, too fast, the plates of its hide shifting and clicking. I remember the first scream. A Lumite girl near the front, glowing so bright with terror she was almost white, and then the breach hound was on her, and I'm not going to describe that part. She didn't make it. She was the first. And then the concourse came apart. 200 students broke and ran, all at once, in every direction. And that was the worst thing they could have done, because the breach hound hunts by motion, and now there was motion everywhere. A stampede of panicking children flooding the corridors, trampling each other, screaming, and the hound waded into them like a predator into a herd, fast and silent and methodical, and the screaming got worse. I didn't run. I want to tell you it was courage. It wasn't. It was the coward's instinct, the one that had kept me invisible my whole life. Don't move. Don't be seen. I pressed myself into a recessed doorway, small and still and silent, and I watched the massacre begin, and I was certain, completely, calmly certain, that I was about to die. I saw Drask, the big Vosk, the one with the tall rank spines and the loud, cruel mouth. He was on the floor in the middle of the concourse, frozen, all his status and swagger gone. Just a terrified kid scrambling backward on his hands, as the breach hound turned its eyeless head toward him and gathered itself to spring. He was going to die. The bully, the one who knocked on her armor and asked if anyone was home. And that's when she came. I didn't see where she came from. One moment Drask was alone on the floor with death coming for him. The next, Kestra Vale was standing over him. She'd put herself between Drask and the breach hound. A 17-year-old girl, in battered gray armor, between a boy who tormented her for a full term and a war beast bred to kill everything in a sealed room. And she wasn't running, she wasn't frozen. She was planted feet apart, knees bent, weight low, in a stance I recognized from the broadcasts, the stance of someone who has done this before and lived. Her armor's servos had spun up. I could hear them even over the screaming, a high mechanical whine as the suit shifted from school mode to something else. The plating tightened, locked. The dull gray surface seemed to harden, and I realized I'd been wrong all this time. We'd all been wrong. The armor wasn't a costume or a comfort or a shell to hide in. It was a weapon. It had always been a weapon. She'd just been keeping it folded away, the way you'd keep a blade sheathed in a school. "Hey," she said. Not to Drask, to the hound. "Hey," louder. She slammed her armored fist against her own chest plate, clang, a deliberate, ringing noise, a beacon of heat and motion and sound, and the breach hound's eyeless head snapped toward her, away from Drask, away from the fleeing children. She'd made herself the loudest, BRIGHTSD, most obvious target in the room. On purpose. "That's right," she said, low and steady, "the way you talk to something you were planning to kill. Me, come on, come on." And the breach hound charged her. I have replayed what happened next more times than I can count, and even now I'm not sure my eyes were fast enough to see all of it. The hound hit her like a cargo sled at full burn. Anyone else, any of us, would have been torn in half. The impact alone would have ended a VOSSK, a THRELL, a CORVANI, anything in that building. She didn't break. She caught it. I don't know how else to say it. She got her armored forearms up and caught the thing, and the servos in her suit screamed, and her boots tore long gouges in the deck plating as she was driven backward. But she did not go down, and she did not let it through. For one impossible heartbeat, a 17-year-old girl held a SYTHIRI breach hound at arm's length while it raked at her with limbs that ended in blades. The blades found her. I saw them find her. They scored across her armor, and where they hit hard enough, they went through the plating, into whatever was underneath, and I saw her flinch, saw a spray of something dark, and I understood she was being torn apart inside that suit, and she was still not letting go. "Drask," she shouted, and her voice was different now, harder, a voice used to giving orders in the worst conditions a body can survive. "Get them out. Lower stairwell, port side, it's the only door it can't fit through. Move." And Drask, to his credit, the only credit I'll ever give him, moved. The order cut through his panic the way nothing else could have. He scrambled up and started screaming at the others, hurting them, shoving them toward the port stairwell, and the stampede found a direction, and bodies started flowing toward the one door that meant survival. She'd done that. With 4 words from inside the jaws of the thing killing her, she turned a massacre into an evacuation. That's the human thing. That's the thing from the broadcasts. Human psychology frequently overrides self-preservation in favor of the protection of others. I'd read that sentence in a classroom and thought it was just words. It wasn't just words. It was her. It was a girl bleeding out inside her armor, buying time with her own body, spending herself to the last coin so that the children who'd called her the can could live. The hound got its footing. It had been off balance from the catch, but now it set itself, and it drove forward with all its weight, and even Kestra Vale couldn't hold that. Her boots gave. She went down onto her back with the breach hound on top of her, and for a moment I was sure that was it, that was the end, and I think I made some sound, some useless coward's noise from my doorway. But she'd gone down on purpose. I realize that now. She'd gone down to get under it, to where its armored hide was thinnest, to where a thing built to attack downward couldn't easily reach. And from underneath it, she did something I will never forget. She reached up with both hands, found a seam in its plating, one of the soft joints where the limbs met the body, and she pulled. I heard it. Over the screaming, over the servos, over the hound's wet shrieking, I heard the sound of a 17-year-old human, armor strong and rage-fueled and absolutely certain, tearing a SYTHIRI war beast apart at the joint with her bare, augmented hands. The hound went berserk. It threw her off. She hit a support pillar hard enough to dent it, but it was hurt now, badly, one of its forelimbs hanging wrong, and it was confused because nothing was supposed to do this. Nothing was supposed to fight back. It had been bred for 100 generations to kill things that broke and fled, and instead it had found the one thing in the galaxy that does neither. It had found a human. And the human got back up. She shouldn't have been able to stand. I know that now, having seen the medical reports. The internal damage alone, I won't list it. She got up anyway, slow, shaking. Her armor was ruined down one side, sparking, leaking, and through the torn plating I could see, for the first time any of us could see, what was underneath. This is the moment. This is the thing the title of every retelling fixes on, because it's the thing none of us were ready for. We saw the scars. The breachhound's blades had peeled her armor open across the torso and shoulder, and underneath, where pale human skin should have been, there was almost no unmarked skin at all. It was scars, old ones layered over older ones. Burned scars, the rippled kind, spreading up her side like something poured on her had cooled there. Surgical scars, long and straight and clinical. Scars that could only have come from blades like the ones tearing at her now, old ones, from the last time from the reach. And running through all of it, threading under the skin, the faint silver lines of neural interface ports and field surgery sutures, and the kind of repairs you only get when a battlefield medic is keeping you alive with no time and no supplies and no certainty you'll survive the cycle. It was a map. Her body was a map of the 40 days, every meter of the reach she'd paid for, written on her in scar tissue. And we'd called her the Can. We'd knocked on her armor and asked if there was anyone inside. There was someone inside. There was someone who had been broken and burned and cut and rebuilt, and had kept getting up every single time, and who was getting up again, right now in front of all of us, to do it one more time so that we could live. The concourse, what was left of it, the kids jammed in the stairwell doorway, frozen mid-flight, watching, went silent. Dead silent. The silence I told you about at the very beginning. The kind where you can hear the air recyclers because there's nothing else left to hear. 200 children who had laughed at her for an entire term, looking at the scars beneath the armor, finally understanding what they had been laughing at. She and the hound faced each other across the ruined concourse. She was unarmed. Her suit was dying around her. She was bleeding from a dozen places. By every law of biology and probability, she should have already been dead twice over. The hound was wounded but alive, and it was still the most dangerous thing any of us had ever seen. It charged her one last time. And KESTRA Vale, I swear this is true, I have the security footage memorized, KESTRA Vale smiled. The terrible smile. The one she'd given DRASK in the cafeteria. The smile of someone who has already seen the worst the universe has and finds the threat in front of her almost funny. I know what you are, she said to it, quiet, almost gentle. I've killed you before. And as it came, she did the last thing any of us expected. She didn't brace. She didn't dodge. She stepped into it, inside the arc of its blades, too close for it to cut properly, and she rammed her armored forearm, the whole failing weight of her suit behind it, straight up under its head, into the soft joint of its throat where she'd already learned its weakness. There was a sound like a structural failure. And the breach hound, the war beast of the Cafeteria Dominion, the thing that had helped burn 40,000 humans off a colony at the edge of the galaxy, shuddered and folded, and died, with a 17-year-old girl's arm buried in its throat. Then it collapsed, and it took her down with it. For a moment, nobody moved. The dead hound lay across the concourse, and Kestra was somewhere underneath it, and the silence held, and we all thought that she died killing it, that she'd spent the very last of herself and there was nothing left. Then her hand moved, one scarred, bleeding human hand, pushing weakly against the dead weight of the thing on top of her. And Drask of all people was the first one to break the silence. He didn't say anything. He just ran across the open concourse to the hound, and he got his shoulder under it and he heaved, this big terrified Vosk boy with his stupid status spines, and he shouted, "Help me! Help me, she's alive!" And then they all came. The kids who'd called her the can, the ones who'd mocked her and shunned her and asked if anyone was home. 200 of them, every species in that building, surged out of the stairwell and across the floor, and they got their hands and limbs and shoulders under that dead war beast, and together, all of them, all of us, because I finally left my doorway, I finally moved, together we lifted it off her. She was a wreck. I won't pretend otherwise. The armor had given everything it had, and so had she, but she was breathing. Her eyes were open. And when they cleared, the first thing she did, the very first thing, was look around at the faces over her, the faces of the children she'd just saved, and she said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Is everyone out? Did everyone make it? Not help me, not I'm dying, not why didn't you help sooner? Did everyone make it?" That was the moment, I think, that the last of us understood. That was the moment something in that whole cruel, frightened, foolish crowd finally cracked open. Because here was the girl we'd spent a term tearing down, lying broken on the deck, asking after us before she asked after herself. The Lumite who died at the start, no, not everyone made it. 3 didn't. I'll carry their names too, alongside the 31 from the Reach. But Kestra Vale had turned a slaughter of 200 into the loss of 3, with her own body as the price, and she lay there bleeding, and the only thing on her mind was whether she'd done enough. Drask started crying. The big Vosk bully on his knees beside her, holding her ruined armored hand, crying like a child, which is what he was, which is what we all were. You saved me," he kept saying. "You saved me, and I called you. I know what you called me." Her mouth twitched toward the ghost of a smile. "Doesn't matter now. Just stay down. Keep pressure here." She guided his hands to the worst of the wounds with the calm of someone who'd done battlefield triage on people she loved while the sky burned. Even dying, she was the one in command, the only adult in the building. The station medics reached us 4 minutes later. The Federation Rapid Response Team reached us 2 hours after that, late, the way they were always late for the people who needed them most, the way they'd been 11 days late for the Reach. She lived. I want you to know that, because I know how this kind of story usually ends, and I've been hard on the universe in this telling, so let me be fair. She lived. It took 6 surgeries and a long time in a regeneration tank, and longer still to put the rest of her back together. But Kestra Vale survived the breach hound the same way she'd survived everything else, by refusing, at a cellular level, to do anything else. They gave her a commendation, a real one from the Federation, with her name spoken out loud in a chamber full of important people, instead of buried under black bars on a file. The same Federation that had decided Howard's Reach wasn't worth saving stood up and called her a hero, and I watched her receive it with the flat, door-closing look on her face, and I knew exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking about 40,000 people who'd been just as brave and gotten a one-word status update instead. Lost. She didn't keep the commendation. She gave it to the families of the 3 students who didn't make it. I only know that because I helped her track down the addresses. The school changed after that. Of course it did. Nobody called her the can again. The word just vanished, the way cruel words do once everyone finally understands what they cost. The Vosk kids stopped sorting people into ranks, at least for a while. It's hard to keep believing your spines make you better than someone after you've watched a primitive tear a war beast apart to save your worthless life. Drask never bullied anyone again as far as I know. Last I heard, he'd gone into medicine. I'd like to think that's not a coincidence. And Kestra still wore the armor. That's the part people always expect to change. And it didn't. And I love that it didn't. She had a new suit eventually, better than the old one, fitted properly. But she wore it for the same reason she'd always worn it, because it kept her here, because the weight of it reminded her where she was, because somewhere on a burning world she'd promised herself she'd never be unprotected again, and that promise didn't expire just because she'd been proven right. The difference was that nobody saw it as strange anymore. They saw it as what it was. A survivor carrying her survival on her back in plain sight every single cycle. We even, and this is the part that still makes my chest do something, a few of us started showing up to class in bits of plating of our own. Nothing serious. A shoulder guard here, a bracer there, not mocking her, standing with her, saying without words, we see it now, we see what it means, we're sorry it took us so long. She never said anything about it. But once, when she caught me wearing a battered old forearm guard I dug out of a surplus bin, she looked at it, and she looked at me, and she did the thing I'd only seen her do twice before. She smiled, but not the terrible smile. A real one. I told you at the start that I was a coward, that I survived by being invisible, that I watched the whole thing from a doorway and didn't move until it was almost over. That's all true. I'm not going to pretend I was brave that cycle. I wasn't. But Kestra Vale taught me something in the months after, when we'd sit in that bad-lit library annex with the soft hum of her armor between us. She taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. She'd been more afraid than I'd ever been. She'd lived inside a fear so total it had rewritten her body. Courage is what you do with the fear. It's standing up because you're terrified, not instead of being terrified. It's getting between the monster and the people behind you, with your hands shaking too hard to hold a weapon, and doing it anyway. The kind where you can't make your hands work because they're shaking too hard, and you have to do the thing anyway, because if you don't, people die. She'd told Drask that in the cafeteria, weeks before any of us understood. She'd told all of us and we'd laughed. I don't laugh anymore. I'm an old Corvani now, older than I ever thought a coward would get to be. I've got a desk and a title and grandchildren of my own, and when they ask me about humans, because they always ask, everyone always asks about humans, I don't tell them about the wars or the broadcasts or the Federation's careful, frightened sentences about a species that doesn't know when to quit. I tell them about a girl who wore armor to school. I tell them how we mocked her for it, how we called her a coward and a freak, and asked if anyone was home inside the metal, how we never once stopped to wonder what kind of life teaches a 17-year-old to never, ever take the armor off. And I tell them about the cycle we found out. The cycle the armor came open and we saw the scars beneath it, and understood, all at once and far too late, that we had spent a whole term laughing at the bravest person any of us would ever meet. Then I tell them the last thing. The thing I want you to take with you too, because it's the truest thing I know, and it took a human child bleeding on a deck plate to teach it to me. Be careful who you mock for the armor they wear. You don't know what it costs them to need it. And you don't know, until the cycle the monster comes through the door, and everyone else freezes, and the strange quiet one you laughed at steps forward without a word. You don't know that the armor was never the thing protecting them. It was the thing protecting you.